Hello everyone, I'm Teribus from Echo Isles from the Guild Omega, and this is Heroic Dark Shamans. There are many conventional strategies to this fight, such as the 2-tank kite around the room, and the 3-tank split group strategy. What we've done is we've taken the 3-tank split group strategy and we've modified it a little bit to make it a little bit more easier for the rest of you. It's a little bit different, but if followed correctly, it can make the fight quite trivial. Follow on as we answer some of the questions you might have about this fight, and in turn, this will become easy mode for the rest of your Seige of Orgrimmar raiding days. Firstly, let's get down to the basics. Group makeup. In order to properly execute this strategy, you're going to need 3 tanks. You're going to want to make sure the 1 tank who will be tanking Wavebinder or Cadris can sufficiently heal themselves without too much trouble, and kite adds quite well. For us, we did use a Paladin. Death Knight might still be okay with the Chillblains. Brewmaster Monks definitely with their slows would be spectacular. Druids might be okay depending on their speed boosts and how much self-healing they can do. Their mobility is definitely a plus. Warriors may or may not be that great, only because they do lack a lot of self-healing, and mostly self-healing that they do might be from something like Victory Rush. So it's best if you have a warrior tank to stick them on top to the Earthbreaker group. Aside from that, you want to make sure you have about 2 to 3 healers. Again, depending on how geared you are, you could use just 2 healers. We used 3 healers just because it made it a lot easier on the rest of the raid. And you need about 4 to 5 DPS, again, depending on your healer makeup. It would affect how many DPS you have. This is another great strategy for those groups that are very melee heavy, and they can take advantage of this strategy to make sure that they can still down the boss without as much trouble as regular groups do. You want to avoid adds altogether, and that is something this strategy really caters to. So just to make sure that if you are going to be going melee heavy, that they're always watching the streams, the foul streams. Those are very important as they can potentially one-shot you. Now to begin, we are assuming that you are familiar with most of the normal mechanics. If you aren't, please make sure you refer to the normal videos such as Fat Boss or any other instructional video that can give you more details about the mechanics. The mechanics that have been added into the heroic version are a little bit more deadly. The first mechanic is Iron Prison. Actually has about a 1,000 yard range in case you were thinking about ranging it. It can also be cast on about 1 to 2 people. Typically we see it on 2 people, but that's normally because it's cast every 30 seconds and it does have a 60-second timer, so you'll see it go on and off every 30 seconds. Once it's about to expire, you want to make sure that you do have a defensive cooldown up, or that your healers are sort of topping you off and giving you damage reductions. Disc Priest bubbles are amazing over here. Otherwise, if this thing goes off and you don't have a defensive on you, you don't have anything that can heal you properly, back up, you will lose quite a bit of health and potentially you could get one-shotted. So make sure that you're watching this very religiously on your screen if you have it on you, and the healers will do the same. The other mechanic is called Iron Tomb. Iron Tomb is, the best way to describe it would be there's like little dust particles that appear on the floor before they're about to drop on top of you. Now Iron Tombs are sort of what they sound like. They're pretty much tombs that drop on top of a player, and they do a bit of damage if you stand in in where they're spawning, like sort of where the dust is. So what you want to do is make sure as it's falling down you're moving away from that. Now mobility classes will have an easier time with this. Non-mobility classes maybe not so much, but of course you want to make sure you're not in there completely. The main thing about Iron Tombs is that you want to make sure that as DPS and healers you're spread out about 3 yards, because within 3 yards you will notice they do spawn and can potentially do damage to the person next to you if you're less than 3 yards apart. So don't be stacked on top of each other or anything like that. The other important thing for healers and DPS to keep in mind is definitely the falling ash. The tanks might not take as much damage, or they'll have something up like defensive or something like that, but it does do an absurd amount of damage in heroic mode. Again, if you don't know what the heck I'm talking about, make sure you watch the normal guide. When it does go off, you want to make sure you do have a defensive for this, or do something like bubbling the raid, or anything that helps prevent sort of raid damage. But make sure you do have a defensive when falling ash comes down. So let's start with a diagram of positioning. For the beginning of the encounter, you want to start basically where the hut of the Dark Shamans is. So whenever a DPS goes in to reset the boss, you want to bring them out, typical normal positioning, and you want to tank the dogs or wolves, whatever you want to call them, until they are dead in the yellow spot shown in the diagram. Once the dogs are dead, this is where the 2 tanks tanking Earthbreaker Haram need to start kiting Earthbreaker on top of the hill, and the rest of the raid needs to follow the 2 tanks. Now the tank who is soloing Wavebinder Candace will stay down and kite him around the pad. That will be in red. So just keep an eye on this diagram and sort of see to get a general idea where the tanks will be. Sorry, not the tanks, but the tank who is solo tanking Wavebinder is going to be taking Wavebinder around. This allows, basically, the strategy will allow the DPS to be more focused on Earthbreaker Haram and burn him down more at the top. And it will allow them not to have to deal with these ads, these little slime ads that are coming down on top of the Wavebinder tank. So you can, as a DPS and a healer, completely avoid that mechanic and let the solo tank deal with it. Now, if you want to get a better idea of how the kiting is done, don't worry. Our Paladin tank did kite the mobs, and he will sort of show you where to go, and I will explain just in a moment here what sort of a route our Paladin tank took. He is the one who actually came up with this strategy, so I will sort of go into his own words on what he did. So keep watching. Now, because this strategy is heavily reliant on the kiting tank, I want to go more into depth about how the kiting is done. This is in the words of our Paladin tank, who did the tanking himself. First, what you want to do is you will run into the blacksmith area. This is a good location to place your toxic storm that Wavebinder will cast on you. The other building that the tank will go into is the bank. The reason is to line of sight the boss so she can stop casting and moves away from the toxic storm, so that the tank is able to melee her to get charges or to do whatever it takes to get a little bit of self-healing done. Now, once the ads do start spawning, you want to avoid going inside of the buildings, as it is most likely you will trap yourself inside and can get one-shotted if the ads sort of surround you. So, in order to remedy that situation, what our tank did was used the back of the buildings to kite them around. And at this point, what ends up happening is you sort of rinse and repeat the kiting around until the bosses are dead. So certain tanks will have abilities that can only be used by meleeing. In our case, our Paladin tank had to use Bastion of Glory, and of course he didn't always have the charges up and all that. So what ends up happening is towards the end, once the boss is lost, it becomes a lot harder to keep for the solo tank to keep themselves up by themselves. So what you would need to do is make sure you have a healer run down at about 35 to 30% of the boss's health and come and help out the solo tank. The other thing for the solo tank is you want to make sure that you're always saving your shield wall type ability for Iron Prison. So you want to make sure they intersect with the debuff as it's about to expire. And obviously the whole point of kiting is try your best not to be much in melee range, as melee range can get pretty deadly. That may be an issue for some tanks, may not be, depends. Make sure, of course, if you're soloing this, you have all of your speed boosts, your enchants, your speed talents, whatever that might be for your class, and make sure you have an Oshit cooldown available. Also, engineering, you can have the Belt, which can help you run faster at some given points, and that's sort of like the Oshit cooldown as well that you could use. But basically, use whatever self-healing and damage reduction abilities you can when you're getting low on HP and basically dealing with prisons. So that's probably the best way to deal with this as the solo tank. You know, in the comments if you want to add any additional tips on how a solo tank can keep himself up or what he can use, definitely do mention that. Now we come back up top to the rest of the raid. There are different views of where you can start to tank Earthbreaker Haram, but for us we just simply stuck our backs to the gate and started our lineup of Ashen Walls there. DPS and healers are spread out more towards the back and to the sides in order to make sure they don't drop the prisons in the way of where the tanks will be bringing Haram through. For handling different mechanics, I'm sort of going to break this down into a few pieces so that it's a little bit more clear to you on how we did this. So first thing is handling foul streams. For the foul streams, the best thing to do is the person who he casts it on, the foul stream, in case you've forgotten what that is, it's the green line of poop. You should stay where you are and let everyone move around you. The reason is because that way the raid will have more control over the damage they will take from foul stream, and basically if you keep moving around and you move the foul stream into someone, you'll get them killed. It's a bad idea. Secondly, you have the Ashen Wall. It's another mechanic more for the tanks that are tanking Earthbreaker Haram. What you basically want to do is, obviously, for Earthbreaker Haram, the first thing is you want to be taunting at 5 stacks of Frost Strike that he casts on the tank. So that's the norm that most people use, even on normal, LFR, flex, whatever you want to take into consideration. And basically what we do is when the Ashen Wall is cast on the tank, you want to make sure you're standing straight in front of the boss. If you're a little bit crooked, what ends up happening is it'll screw up where the Ashen Wall is dropped. That means if you're standing at a certain angle, or if you're tanking the boss in a certain angle, it'll angle the Ashen Wall, meaning that it could cause potential problems for the DPS and the healers on where they are basically putting their iron tombs. And they could get one-shotted by them if they don't move out. So you want to be a little bit considerate towards the DPS and the healers as both the tanks. Now when you're actually having the Ashen Wall drop, the best way is you want to leave minimal gaps in between the Ashen Walls that are dropped. You'll notice in our video that we've really neatly stacked the Ashen Walls. What you simply do is, usually what ends up happening is as you're tanking the boss, the Frost Strikes will sort of land up just at 5 as the Ashen Walls drop. So what the other tank can simply do is go ahead of where the boss is, taunt the boss there, and then just simply realign himself in order to make sure that the Ashen Walls are drop correctly where they're intended to drop. So another thing we noticed using this strategy is that sometimes what may end up happening is the Ashen Walls, as you might know already, will start spawning at about 50%. Sometimes you may notice he will turn around, that's Earthbreaker, you might turn around to cast Foul Stream on someone right around that time. So what that ends up doing sometimes is it drops an Ashen Wall on the person who he's turned around to. So that can be kind of bad for the raid and a little bit unlucky, but again, it sort of is something that happens once in a while. It's a rare thing, but we have seen it happen, and it does also depend on how high or low your DPS is and if they're lining up. Once you do reach 25% on the boss does pop Lust. So you will do the same with your raid and pop Heroism at the same time. Your healer should have already started running towards the other tank at about 30 to 35% of the boss's health, and make sure that they can keep themselves and the tank down there alive very well. What I mean by very well is they need to have instant casts, they need to be able to run on the move sort of thing, and especially as a healer you may pull healing aggro on the ads, so if you do have any aggro reduction or aggro drops, that would be wonderful. For priests, Fade is a wonderful thing. You can also help out the solo tank by casting slows or roots on the ads to help out the tank, such as tendrils, or if you're a druid, mass entanglement, or whatever you can use to help out the solo tank. Typically healers such as the disc priests and druids are really good at this because they can heal while moving, and that's something that you want to keep in mind too while being the tank healer downstairs. Monks may also not be a bad choice because they have their own movement speed boosts, and that's something that they can use to their advantage. Their healing spheres are something that's also an advantage for the tank and them, so they can sort of go on the move. Towards the end, it's sort of a spammy and keep yourself alive, keep the solo tank alive at this point, because at this point now what's happening is the solo tank and the healer down there are relying on the rest of the raid to finish Earthbreaker Haram and end the fight as soon as possible. So that is something you obviously want to make sure that you have enough DPS for it. You bring your top DPS. Typically looking at our recount charts, we had all the DPS do anywhere between 275k and above. So if that gives you a general idea on what you need on a 10-man, then that's something we used with 4 DPS. So just make sure you keep that in mind. Other than that, that should cover pretty much most of the fight, and I really do hope that this guide did help you. This is Teribus signing out, and I will, after this commentary, post our full fight music video so that you can watch it without all my commentary. I do want to thank you for watching the Final Hours Productions. Please like and subscribe. Thank you for your time.
Storm and fire! Your skull will adorn my necklace.
My wolf will feast on your blood. We do not ask the elements for aid.
The true horde takes what it wants.
Tortured wind, stale and toxic. Drawn dead fire, black and smoldering.
Anguished water, stagnant and poisonous, crumbling earth, plagued with rust.
Bend to our will. But we are the true Lord! Lust for power! I can hear them no longer. The elements! What have we done?